This is In the Fast Lane, live from the Australian Grand Prix, with your hosts Matt Clayton and Michael Laminato.
And we are live within the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix. We're just hours away from the 2022 Formula One Heineken Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park this afternoon. I'm your host, Matt Clayton. Alongside me as co-host, as always, is Michael Laminato. Hello, Michael.
Oh, happy Sunday. What a day.
Happy Sunday. The weather's turned it on for us again. We're also very pleased to be joined here on race day by one of the true legends of the sport we all love. It's a warm welcome to three-time Formula One world champion, Sir Jackie Stewart. Welcome, Sir Jackie.
Obviously, there are a lot of Scottish people here.
We did invite them all ahead of time, Sir Jackie, but we just said before, race day in Australia, it's not something we've been able to say for a couple of years, but I think everyone in Formula One has been looking forward to coming back here, and it's the perfect storm, isn't it? The weather's fantastic, we've got a brand new track, we've got all the momentum of last year. This is one of the more memorable ones, isn't it?
Yeah, everybody in Formula One loves to come to the Grand Prix. I have missed a Grand Prix for a very long time, here in Sydney anyway. I did come to Australia way back in, well, before you were born, actually. Way back in about 64 or 65. I came to race and I won a couple of races over here.
The Tasman series, Jackie?
Well, I went to Melbourne, I went to Sydney, I raced in, I don't know, a lot of places. Anyway, it's always been great, but now I think you have the best Grand Prix in the business right now. You've got a brand new circuit, I mean, on the basis of the tarmac Adams, a brand new high technology piece of kit. So it's going to be better for the drivers. I mean, it's got good weather for a change. We've occasionally come here and got rain. And of course, as a Scotsman, it never rains in Scotland. Anyway, very nice to be back.
Yeah, very unfamiliar conditions considering it's this time of year. Let's talk a little bit about what we've seen so far on track. We've seen Ferrari again looking absolutely quick, Charles Leclerc up the front. We've got a little bit of a young new generation now, don't we? Now, Lewis can't be discounted, but generally we've got Leclerc, Verstappen, Carlos Sainz. We can rattle a whole bunch off. Who among this new generation is most impressive to you?
Well, I think it takes a little time for the younger ones to come in and mature. For example, Lewis Hamilton's been around for a very long time. He knows all the business. He's had experience and knowledge of it. But, of course, Mercedes-Benz had more money and more technology than anybody else. So for about the last 6 or 7 years, they've had too big an advantage technically to take on Mercedes or even Red Bull, who were their biggest competitor. So I think suddenly with the new formula that's just come in, Mercedes-Benz are well behind. Now, that's sometimes because these guys and girls nowadays who are working in Formula One can burn out because for 7 or 8 years they've been at it, bang, bang, bang. And sooner or later they get tired. Sooner or later there's new people who have to be retaught into the culture because there's a culture in every team. I think Mercedes-Benz now may have difficulty coming back to being as dominant as they were. And that's a good thing. I mean, it's been going on for too long. It's great to see Ferrari back because it's got a great name. I never drove for Ferrari because in those days it was the old man, Ferrari himself, that was the team principal. And he was a very difficult man to work with. So I chose not to work for Ferrari. But right now they've got new management. And by the way, the guy that's now running Formula One, Stefano Domenicali, was running the Formula One team back many years ago. So he's a man of considerable experience. And of course, he's now running Formula One in general. So they're competitive. Alpine are coming up.
Yeah, they certainly are.
McLaren, I hope, are coming up. I can't remember. Do they have an Australian driver in McLaren?
That was going to be my next question, Jackie. You only have to look out this weekend and see how much papaya there is around here, as McLaren would like us to call it. We know that Daniel had quite a difficult first season at McLaren last season, but obviously the high point of winning at Monza. Daniel's in his middle age now as a Formula One driver, 33 years old this year. Tell us about him as an ambassador for Australia overseas, because he has a reputation overseas that does wonders for this country. He's just a great ambassador for this country on a global playing field, isn't he?
You got to understand that there's no overseas now.
Yes.
We're living in one big happy family because of the internet, apart from anything else. And I've known him right from puppy stage, before he ever got to Formula One. I've been to his home in Perth. I've known his mum and dad. I've met his sister. And he's a really nice guy. And while he was with Red Bull, he was one of the fastest drivers in Formula One. For whatever reason, he's gone off the hot spot. It'll come back. And he's seeing that beginning now. Now, the car has not been competitive enough to really get the job done. But he also has been behind his own teammate. And that's a big deal. You've got to be better than your teammate. So I think we're going to see that again. There's nothing wrong with his skills. He's a very talented driver. But, a lot of people, when they get to the top, suddenly they go down. And he did change 3 teams. From one to another to get to McLaren. And McLaren have fantastic facilities. Probably Norman Foster designed headquarters, beautiful place to work. I think you're going to see him coming back, but it might take another 2 or 3. I hope it's this year.
If I can ask you one more, we've mentioned how good the crowd is here in Australia this weekend. It's been huge, but it's not only in Australia we're seeing Formula One become more popular. In the United States, it feels like Formula One is really growing. You have a long connection with the United States. Next year, there'll be 3 races there. Does it feel like Formula One has finally cracked the US? And why is it that suddenly we're seeing such a big growth?
America's a big country, a very big country, and it's culturally very unusual. The South's a completely different country than the North, and Midwest is another completely different country to the West. So the South, the West, and the North are like different animals altogether. NASCAR is boring as hell. So we don't want NASCAR, and he's not. Normally he's a NASCAR guy. I can tell by his tummy.
I'm taking that as a compliment.
Formula One has become big time, and a lot has happened with the internet. That's huge. So I think we're going to see more and more of it in America because it's such a big country. We've got Las Vegas. The last time there was a race in Las Vegas, it wasn't very good. It was in the car park of Caesar's Palace. Not ideal. So I believe now the new one is going to be on the street, the main street of the drive, where all the money is. So let's hope it's good. I think Miami is naturally going to be good. They're already sold out. An enormous success package so far financially. Everybody comes from South America with all the material problems in South America, the financial problems in South America, a lot of people go to Miami, so we're going to see multi-numbers of different nationalities down there, and Formula One is multi-nationality. So I think it's a good place to have a Grand Prix in America. Whether it's successful in Vegas, I'm not quite sure. Texas is now doing very well and had a full house the last Grand Prix. So I think the Americans are slowly coming round. Apple pie and ice cream is America, and they really don't know any other food. So let's hope that does the trick.
Let's hope it does. Sir Jackie, I know you've got a very busy day today. It's been wonderful to catch up with you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
We'll be back with more on In the Fast Lane after this short break.
Please thank Sir Jackie Stewart as he leaves the stage. Coming up very, very soon on the podcast is Mick Doohan, and thanks to our friends here at Maui Gym, we have a couple of vouchers to give away for some free pairs of sunglasses. 3 to give away. We're going to let you know how you can win those a little bit later on as the boys move through the podcast. But once you finish listening here to In the Fast Lane, head down towards Turn 1. That's where Maui Gym is. Find your next pair of sunglasses like the ones these two are wearing or not. It's entirely up to you. Nathan and his team are ready to help you find the perfect pair of shades, and Maui Jim has over 125 styles of sunglasses, all of which are polarised to protect from 100% of UVA and UVB rays. Maui Jim, see the world like you've never seen. If you're listening to us here on In the Fast Lane, you obviously love F1 and have a great taste in podcasts. Have you heard F1 Beyond the Grid? It's the podcast where you'll truly get to know the biggest names in F1. It's hosted by F1 journalist Tom Clarkson. Recent guests include 1992 world champion Nigel Mansell, Susie Wolff, and Ferrari's Carlos Sainz. Every week on F1 Beyond the Grid, a superstar driver, big boss, or brilliant brain from the world of F1 opens up about the highs and lows of their racing careers and their lives off track. You'll hear stories you've never heard before and insight you won't hear anywhere else. There are more than 150 episodes in the back catalogue. In-depth interviews with Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, Kimi Raikkonen, Lewis Hamilton, and many more. Why not give it a listen right here at Albert Park in the gaps between sessions? It's also perfect for your journey to work, while out walking, or your flight home from the Australian Grand Prix. You can find F1 Beyond the Grid on Apple, Spotify, and all other major podcast apps. It's also available on F1's YouTube channel. So once you've finished listening to us, search for F1 Beyond the Grid. It might just become your second favourite Formula One podcast, after In the Fast Lane, of course. Time for a bit of F1 trivia. Did you know the Australian Grand Prix was once held twice in a row and that the same driver won both races? In 1995, the Australian Grand Prix was the final race of the season. It was held in Adelaide. In 1996, the Australian Grand Prix was the first race of the season, held right here in Melbourne. The same driver won both. It was Damon Hill. So Damon Hill won 2 consecutive Australian Grand Prix, back-to-back, just 119 days apart. I mentioned Damon Hill because he's one of the hosts of the F1 Nation podcast, which you should definitely check out. It's hosted by Damon, with F1 reporters Tom Clarkson and Natalie Pinkham. They chat to a whole host of F1 guests from around the world, drivers, team bosses, and paddock insiders. The next episode will be out this Tuesday. They'll have the last word on what we hope will be a thrilling Australian Grand Prix here at Albert Park. Search for F1 Nation on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all major podcast apps, or F1's YouTube channel. Check out In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix. Dedicated to Formula One and MotoGP, In the Fast Lane host Matt Clayton is joined by F1 journalist Michael Laminato and MotoGP race winner Chris Vermeulen to interview some of the biggest names in world motorsport and update you on all the latest F1 and MotoGP racing news and talking points. You can find In the Fast Lane each week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix, live from Albert Park, with Matt Clayton and Michael Laminato.
And we are back within the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix, ahead of this afternoon's 2022 Formula One Heineken Australian Grand Prix here at Albert Park. Michael, we just had Sir Jackie Stewart on before. The intriguing question of which of this new generation of drivers all coming up at the same time might end up being the best of them. And we're in a bit of a golden generation for relatively young guys right now. It's very interesting that Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Lando Norris, and of course Max Verstappen, which probably the Verstappen factor in these teams trying to find their version of Max Verstappen. Yeah. We're in this real generational change at the moment with the guys that are up and coming. I guess Alpine would like Esteban Ocon to possibly be in that conversation, but you know, we can see this year what Charles Leclerc can do if you give him a car to fight with. This is going to be a battle that we're probably not going to know the result of for quite some time, but geez, there's some contenders in there, isn't there?
Sounding pretty ageist, Matt, if I were Fernando Alonso. He can stick around for 2 or 3 more years as a 40-year-old. 40 is the new 20, I think.
He's just coming into his prime.
Yes. No, I think you're right. We are in a really great moment for young drivers. And it's a weird thing, isn't it? And I think it's a side effect, actually, of the fact that Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton have been at the top for so long.
Yep.
That all these great young guys have managed to find themselves into that next level of teams, which slowly have risen to the top as Mercedes comes down to the bottom. Leclerc, as you said, I mean, that guy is the alternative Max Verstappen, the shadow Verstappen, I don't know what you want to call him.
Yeah.
He is sort of the same equivalent level talent. And then you do have guys like Lando Norris, who we saw a big step forward from last year.
Yes.
And I think another year in will probably cement himself in that status. I mean, George Russell, I never thought I'd say George Russell going to Mercedes just needs a good car.
Oh.
But he just needs a good car.
Too soon.
And Esteban Ocon, to be fair to him, is much closer to Fernando Alonso in performance than certainly I expected last season.
Agreed.
And, he's still recovering a little bit, I guess, from his time out of the sport, could use a little bit of a good baseline. They're all coming along, and hopefully, as the sport equalises with the cost cap and the regulations to minimise the differences in spend for development, means that we might actually get all of these teams converge. And when today we're talking about Ferrari and Red Bull, maybe next year we'll be talking, maybe even later this year, talking about Alpine being in there, maybe Alfa Romeo. All of a sudden we have 4 or 5 teams, 4 or 5 great top-line drivers competing, and I mean, that's the dream.
I think that these new guys, when they always have a moment where you just go, okay, this is something we need to look at. And so Daniel Ricciardo's quite good mates with Marcus Ericsson when Marcus was at Sauber, when Charles had his rookie season at Sauber. About 3 races in, Ericsson came over to Daniel and said, I don't understand how this guy is as fast as he is.
Yes.
And this is within 3 or 4 races of his Formula One career. And thinking, is this an outlier? Because Marcus Ericsson was a lot of things in a Formula One car. He was not slow.
No.
He was not slow at all, and he could not understand how this young guy was getting his head around Formula One so quickly. And we look at this year, the Ferrari clearly is a good car this year. And I think, they're both reasonably matched on pace, Leclerc and Sainz. But Leclerc, to me, looks like a world champion in waiting, doesn't he?
Yes, and I think there is in him, in a similar way you can see with Verstappen and a couple other drivers, there's just something innate about it. Like, I think Carlos Sainz, as you said, is pretty much thereabouts, but he's a little bit more, has to build his way up there. He's got to construct his way to that ultimate pace. Leclerc is a guy who just gets in and is almost immediately there. And I was talking to Pierre Gasly earlier in the week, and even he sort of says, and it's always interesting when the drivers say this, some drivers just have something. They've just got it. And Leclerc's clearly a guy that's just got it. He's got that, the years of experience now that means he's not likely to go out there and crash the car as he was when he was a rookie. And that means I think this year is going to be really good for him.
Ladies and gentlemen, joining us up here on the In the Fast Lane podcast stage, motorsport royalty with an Australian accent, 5-time 500cc world champion Mick Doohan. Mick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's a fairly big crowd we got out there.
More listening, Mick, than actually watching live here. But Mick, it's been so long since Australia had international events. We know why. But the Grand Prix, it's back with a vengeance. You look at the crowds we've had over the course of this weekend, the hype and anticipation around this event. This kind of feels like Australia is waking up and rejoining the rest of the world a bit, doesn't it?
Well, I think, thankfully, we've been tagged along with the rest of the world who can't get enough of Formula One or any motorsport, to be honest, at the moment, so which is great. Clearly, Netflix Drive to Survive has given us a big boost.
Yep.
But as you say, especially in this part of the world, the lockdowns have been massive, and I think people are just happy to get out and about, and the end result is we're sold out, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's not only Drive to Survive is a big part, as you said, and I wish we had $1 every time we've mentioned that in the podcast because we're doing pretty well. But the new cars this year are clearly contributing quite a bit to the spectacle. We've seen a little bit of a taste of them around the new track as well. What's your take on all that?
I think that's a bit optimistic.
We're all about optimism.
We've been sold out for well before the cars hit the track. Mm-hmm. So I think it is really, it's just a bit of a buzz. With the live events, people want to just sort of get out and do something. Certainly, you just have a look at the younger crowd as well. So we've got a younger demographic here as what we've had in the past, and I think that is purely down to the Hollywood aspect of it all.
Yeah.
And rightly or wrongly, it's a good thing because at the end of the day, there's more people who's got more interest in motorsport because we were sort of an ageing population, like myself, with motorsport, and the future didn't look bright. And now it actually looks like it's got a bit of a buzz. Everyone wants to get involved with it. Simulator sales are through the roof, so everyone wants to be an iRacing champion or whatever. And but look at it. We got families, we got kids, it's magnificent.
A lot more women ticket sales to women this year as well, if the stats are correct. But Mick, you mentioned Drive to Survive. I'm wondering back in your heyday how you would have gone with having a 10-strong camera crew from the Netflix of the day in the garage when you were racing. How do you reckon that would have gone?
Oh, it would have been fine. It's just whether the makeup artist could have got it right for me the whole way through. But no, look, it is a distraction, I'm sure, for some of these guys, but I don't think they're really in their face.
No.
So they're running around the place. I know MotoGP are doing a bit the same these days. They sort of have some people. And from what I've seen, I attend a number of the Grand Prix, both on MotoGP and F1, and they're sort of in the background. They're not really, other than a few of the people that they sort of have on there, you know, the Christian Horners and the whatever, sort of, you know, making star appearances every 3 minutes. So
Yes.
they're about the only ones who really probably have a little bit more time restraints put on their weekend.
Somehow I don't think Christian Horner minds the
Sorry?
intrusion. Somehow I don't think Christian Horner minds the intrusion.
No, he doesn't seem to be, does he?
He seems to be quite happy with
Yeah.
it. Mick, let's stay with the family name for the moment. Your son Jack competing in F2 this year. New team for him, obviously. 4 races into the season. How are things shaping up for him? Because the speed's been there, but maybe just not the results in the race have come through for him just yet.
No, that's right. Unfortunate in Saudi Arabia with a little bit of a technical issue with qualifying. But I don't think there was a few other teams with similar things just due to the fact they didn't get any running in FP1. The only practice session you get just due to red flag. So for the Virtuosi team, they didn't really have a good understanding of how much fuel the car was going to burn, and you need apparently 0.8 of a kilo of fuel left in the car, and he had 0.79 instead of 0.8 or something. You know? But I mean, the rule's a rule, and so he had to start at the back of the grid. First race again. So he's got the speed. First race sort of had a bit of a coming together with the guy who eventually won the race, but the good thing is he's got the speed. So he's got in both races he was able to come back from the back of the grid and get up into the top 10. So like I think everyone's sort of quite happy with him considering it's only sort of round 2 of the first season in F2.
Yeah. Just on Jack as well, this has clearly been an important 12 or 18 months for him. He's changed stables now over to Alpine. What's been the mindset change for him as he's maturing closer to the top? And do you see a bit of yourself in the way he's approaching these younger years in his career?
No, it's hard to reflect back on what I was doing many years ago, but I think the team change for him last year was a major shift in his capability or being shown, because every other car he's driven before that was essentially as a front runner.
Yep.
HWA sort of left with their tail between their legs, and Van Amersfoort have taken the team over, and they're straight away on the front.
Yeah.
They're up the front. So really it was just a unfortunate situation. We all believed, it was a few of us, Jean Alesi's son as well, sort of. We all believe HWA being sort of part of the AMG group, part of Mercedes, essentially, that, you know, they're going to do great things. And in fact, a lot of the F2 and F3 grid were actually concerned about these guys, such a big juggernaut coming in, whereas in fact they were absolutely hopeless. You know, there's no all they do is put fuel in the car and put seatbelts on, and that was it. But so I think for that, and then he's got his confidence, and his confidence just has grown, and to do what he did in the Trident against the Prema cars was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then likewise, and that put him in the box seat to get some good offers for F2. So, and then he's testing F1 in a couple of weeks' time. So it's all sort of starting to head. But like with any young driver, he has to deliver. You know, the mindset of some of the stuff that I've instilled into him over the years is probably brushing off, but I mean, I'm still his dad, so he'd rather tell me to F off than listen to me half the time, you know.
All the parents in the audience agree with that one.
Exactly.
Mick, one last one before we let you go. We should talk some two wheels, given there is a race going on at the Circuit of the Americas this weekend for the Americas Grand Prix. 4th round of the season. Horrible time for us here, about 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. It seems like a long time away, but the season so far, 3 races, 9 podiums, 9 different podium finishes so far. It just seems as wide open as MotoGP has ever been, doesn't it?
Look, Carmelo Espeleta, the head of Dorna, has done a great thing over the years. You know, from going from 2-stroke to 4-stroke, and then the electronic change where everyone's controlled electronics. So it's brought other manufacturers in, and it's just made things a lot more of a level playing field.
Yep.
And that's what you want at the end of the day, is great racing. So it'd be nice to do something similar. You mentioned the cars here. Certainly made a bit of a difference, but it'd be good to make some more commonality between the cars, and then that way we might be able to see some more dicing. At the end of the day, everyone's here to see the good racing rather than this car or that car and whatever else. And unfortunately, F1, there's such disparity between the good teams and the bad teams that it's not going to be MotoGP. But as you say, it's a spectacle, and that's why everyone loves to turn on the telly, but maybe not at 4 a.m.
Yeah, no, very true. I'll be doing it reluctantly tomorrow morning, but we can't wait for MotoGP to be back at Phillip Island later this year. Mick, I know you've got a busy Sunday ahead. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Pleasure. Enjoy.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, joining us here on In the Fast Lane Live will be Aston Martin driver ambassador Jessica Hawkins.
And looking forward to that, as we are looking forward to giving away our 3 vouchers. We've got 3 of them to give away for some free sunnies from our friends here at Maui Gym. And when you've stopped listening to the boys here on In the Fast Lane, head down towards Turn 1. That's where they are. Find your next pair of sunnies like the ones that Michael and Matt are going with right now. Or some others, it's entirely up to you. Nathan and his team, they're ready to help you find the perfect pair of shades. You could squeeze it in between the end of this podcast and race time. Maui Gym, 125 styles of sunglasses, all of which are polarised and protect from 100% of UVA and UVB rays. Maui Gym, see the world like you've never seen. Time for a bit of F1 trivia. Did you know the Australian Grand Prix was once held twice in a row and that the same driver won both races? In 1995, the Australian Grand Prix was the final race of the season. It was held in Adelaide. In 1996, the Australian Grand Prix was the first race of the season, held right here in Melbourne. The same driver won both. It was Damon Hill. So Damon Hill won 2 consecutive Australian Grand Prix, back-to-back, just 119 days apart. I mentioned Damon Hill because he's one of the hosts of the F1 Nation podcast, which you should definitely check out. It's hosted by Damon, with F1 reporters Tom Clarkson and Natalie Pinkham. They chat to a whole host of F1 guests from around the world, drivers, team bosses and paddock insiders. The next episode will be out this Tuesday. They'll have the last word on what we hope will be a thrilling Australian Grand Prix here at Albert Park. Search for F1 Nation on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all major podcast apps, or F1's YouTube channel. If you're listening to us here on In the Fast Lane, you obviously love F1 and have a great taste in podcasts. Have you heard F1 Beyond the Grid? It's the podcast where you'll truly get to know the biggest names in F1. It's hosted by F1 journalist Tom Clarkson. Recent guests include 1992 world champion Nigel Mansell, Susie Wolff, and Ferrari's Carlos Sainz. Every week on F1 Beyond the Grid, a superstar driver, big boss, or brilliant brain from the world of F1 opens up about the highs and lows of their racing careers and their lives off track. You'll hear stories you've never heard before and insight you won't hear anywhere else. There are more than 150 episodes in the back catalogue. In-depth interviews with Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, Kimi Räikkönen, Lewis Hamilton, and many more. Why not give it a listen right here at Albert Park in the gaps between sessions? It's also perfect for your journey to work, while out walking, or your flight home from the Australian Grand Prix. You can find F1 Beyond the Grid on Apple, Spotify, and all other major podcast apps. It's also available on F1's YouTube channel. So once you've finished listening to us, search for F1 Beyond the Grid. It might just become your second favourite Formula One podcast, after In the Fast Lane, of course. Check out In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix. Dedicated to Formula One and MotoGP, In the Fast Lane host Matt Clayton is joined by F1 journalist Michael Laminato and MotoGP race winner Chris Vermeulen to interview some of the biggest names in world motorsport and update you on all the latest F1 and MotoGP racing news and talking points. You can find In the Fast Lane each week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix, live from Albert Park, with Matt Clayton and Michael Laminato.
And we are back within the Fast Lane live at the 2022 Formula One Heineken Australian Grand Prix. Race time just 2.5 hours away for round 3 of the 2022 Formula One season. But we are very, very pleased to be joined up on stage by Aston Martin driver ambassador Jessica Hawkins. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Woo.
I do love the hat. I feel sort of, I don't know, I've dropped the ball here, haven't I, Michael? You're very resplendent with your cap, and I've definitely dropped the ball here. But Jessica, welcome. Tell us about what the role involves for you, because it's multifaceted. It might take the rest of the podcast for us, but broadly, summary, what is the role for you this year and how you involved with the team?
So On a race weekend,
Yes.
I would do a lot of work with the sponsors. Hot laps, if hot laps are happening at the circuit.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not here, which hot laps are my favourite, as you can imagine. Quite a lot of media, a lot of interviews, filling in for the drivers if they get held up doing anything. Unfortunately, not the driving, though.
Not the good bit.
And back at the factory, my role just keeps increasing, really. So I'll be starting on the simulator next month, which obviously is going to be a big step forward for me. That's always been the goal. And whilst I've not driven the car yet, I would never say never. And hopefully the opportunity arises.
One of the great advantages, of course, being an Aston Martin, aside from working around such great cars, is you're also working around Sebastian Vettel, the four-time world champion. What have you been able to learn from just even observing the way he goes about his practice? Obviously one of the most experienced guys, and you can't doubt his credentials.
Honestly, he is one of the most incredible people that I've ever met. He shows such an interest in my racing as well. He's often asking about how I'm getting on or what I'm racing, or and he really just puts another perspective on racing, to be honest. He's so, and everything that he stands for because he genuinely believes in it. None of it is for show or anything. Like, he really strongly believes in what he says he does. So, and it's really refreshing. I think him and Lewis have been pioneers in that. And moving forward, him and Lance are great people to learn from.
Definitely feels that, what Seb stands for is very genuine, and it hasn't really wavered. And he came into this sport so young, as a very young man, but he knew exactly what he wanted. He cleared the clutter out of his life, and I think we're seeing a lot of that messaging now. But Jessica, let's look at the W Series. Look back for a third season this year. It's now very much part of the F1 support calendar. Do you feel that it's really growing and growing? Because it definitely seems to be taking much more of a foothold.
Honestly, in 2019 was its first year.
Yeah.
I think nobody really knew how it was going to go, but they did such a great job, and the racing was so great. It was run so well that there was only one place for it to go to,
Yes.
which is the pinnacle of motorsport, Formula One. So it debuted last year. Back this year, we kick off in Miami. I'm obviously very excited about that.
Fantastic.
It's going to be quite a long time since I last was in car, so I can imagine I'm going to be hurting a lot. Despite all of the training, it doesn't matter how hard you train, you're still, first day back, you still hurt. So yeah, I'm excited, I feel fresh, I feel ready to go, and I'm excited for another season.
Obviously, the racing aspect is part of the W Series. Just having another category is always good for racing. What's the effect you've seen had on, for example, aspiring young women who want to become racers? Because that's the secondary, I guess, component of it, right? Is highlighting that it is something you can do.
Definitely, and I think it's giving, it's a figurehead for multiple figureheads for young drivers and young females to look up to, and for them to know that motorsport is something that is a female sport as well. It's not just restricted to men. And really, I think that W Series have been a big driving force behind that message.
Now, this is a question I've never asked on this podcast. I'm very much looking forward to ask it. How does one get involved in stunt driving? Take us back to where this begins, because this is not a conversation we have very often here on In the Fast Lane. But
You've never seen me drive, that's why.
that's probably a good thing. But how did you manage to get involved in this from the start? Was it something you were aspiring to do, or something that you kind of fell into as time went by?
Honestly, oh God. So I've been racing since I was 8 years old. I started in karting. And it's no secret that motorsport is extremely expensive,
Yes.
and you need a lot of backing to make it anywhere in motorsport. Sadly, despite what was a great CV and up and coming through my karting career, I really struggled to get sponsors on board for many reasons, and it's difficult for any driver, not just because I'm a female. I'm not from a wealthy family, so I had to go and find all of those sponsors, and sometimes you just don't find them.
Yes.
Despite all the doors that you knock on. So the stunt driving really came about. So I was leading the championship that I was racing in at the time, but I only had the budget for the first 3 races, but I won all of those 3 races. And then a job opportunity came up for a show called Fast and Furious Live, which you may have heard of the movies.
Yes, indeed.
And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for it. I've never done any stunt driving, but I'm just going to go for it and see how I get on. It's so different to racing. Like, it's same set of skills, just using a different way. And really, I was so lucky in that I picked it up really quite quickly, and I think it was my rate of progression that got me the job. So then I was stuck between a full-time job driving on a live show, Fast and Furious, or I continue with racing and try and finish the season that I'm racing in. All of my family tell me to not do it. You know, you're just about to crack the racing, you're just about to, you know, you're leading the championship. Everybody told me don't do it. But in my eyes, even if I'd have gone on to win the championship, even if I'd have finished the championship, found the budget to continue, I would have needed double that budget to race what I wanted to race the next season.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't see that it was possible. So something in my mind was telling me, just take the job. So I took the job. And that then subsequently led into, first of all, it was the most amazing thing that I've ever done. And secondly, it led on to do the James Bond movie. Then led on to a few more movies and etc. So really what seemed like not the best idea at the time turned into one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to me. And now I'm
Absolutely.
racing again.
Yeah.
I want to ask you what is probably the dumb stunt question, but what is the coolest, like what's the best stunt you've done? You mentioned No Time to Die. That, I mean, look, James Bond, well-renowned action series. What kind of stunts have you, or what is your specialty, I suppose?
Favourite stunt?
Yeah.
One of them isn't out yet, so I can't tell you.
Exclusive.
It is coming out
damn.
soon. I think, when is it? April, I think it comes out.
Countdown.
Fantastic.
But current to date one that is available, obviously James Bond was a massive highlight and a milestone in my career. And I'm not sure anything will top that. But my favourite stunt was in a movie called Infinite, where I was driving an Aston Martin Vantage, crashing through a police station. And it's a Mark Wahlberg movie, so you should definitely go and watch. It's a good movie, aside from the driving as well, but I'm just biased because I like the driving, and it was very fun for me. It's called Infinite on Amazon Prime.
What's the film coming out in April that we can see this? Or
It's not actually a movie. It's... I'll share it on my socials.
You can't say, wow, you can't even... Whoa.
No.
I'm excited to find out now.
I'm intrigued.
I am intrigued.
I was scared for my life.
Maybe, yeah. Wow, jeez.
Really.
Wow.
I'm going to follow up on that one.
Follow Jessica Hawkins on social media, I guess, is a takeaway from that. But Jessica, look, we've got a couple of other things we need to get through this hour, and the race is just 2 hours away. We appreciate you're very, very busy this weekend. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you.
And my first experience of Australia has been amazing.
We're going to press pause on in the fast lane for a moment, but coming up next, we're going to preview this afternoon's third round of the 2022 F1 season with Autosport's Luke Smith.
That is coming up very, very soon. We've got still some sunglasses vouchers to give away from our friends at Maui Gym. Once you finish listening to the boys here on In the Fast Lane, head down towards Turn 1. Make sure you stop by the team at Maui Gym. They're looking good with their sunglasses, Matt and Michael, when they've got them on anyway. Find your next pair. Oh, they have got them on. Sorry, I was looking at my script. Nathan and his team are ready to help you find the perfect pair of shades. Maui Gym, over 125 styles of sunglasses, all of which are polarised to protect from 100% of UVA and UVB rays. Maui Gym, see the world like you've never seen. Stick around. We're going to give away some vouchers on the other side of this. If you're listening to us here on In the Fast Lane, you obviously love F1 and have a great taste in podcasts. Have you heard F1 Beyond the Grid? It's the podcast where you'll truly get to know the biggest names in F1. It's hosted by F1 journalist Tom Clarkson. Recent guests include 1992 world champion Nigel Mansell, Susie Wolff, and Ferrari's Carlos Sainz. Every week on F1 Beyond the Grid, a superstar driver, big boss, or brilliant brain from the world of F1 opens up about the highs and lows of their racing careers and their lives off track. You'll hear stories you've never heard before and insight you won't hear anywhere else. There are more than 150 episodes in the back catalogue. In-depth interviews with Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, Kimi Räikkönen, Lewis Hamilton, and many more. Why not give it a listen right here at Albert Park in the gaps between sessions? It's also perfect for your journey to work, while out walking, or your flight home from the Australian Grand Prix. You can find F1 Beyond the Grid on Apple, Spotify, and all other major podcast apps. It's also available on F1's YouTube channel. So once you've finished listening to us, search for F1 Beyond the Grid. It might just become your second favourite Formula One podcast, after In the Fast Lane, of course. Time for a bit of F1 trivia. Did you know the Australian Grand Prix was once held twice in a row and that the same driver won both races? In 1995, the Australian Grand Prix was the final race of the season. It was held in Adelaide. In 1996, the Australian Grand Prix was the first race of the season, held right here in Melbourne. The same driver won both. It was Damon Hill. So Damon Hill won 2 consecutive Australian Grand Prix, back-to-back, just 119 days apart. I mentioned Damon Hill because he's one of the hosts of the F1 Nation podcast, which you should definitely check out. It's hosted by Damon with F1 reporters Tom Clarkson and Natalie Pinkham. They chat to a whole host of F1 guests from around the world, drivers, team bosses and paddock insiders. The next episode will be out this Tuesday. They'll have the last word on what we hope will be a thrilling Australian Grand Prix here at Albert Park. Search for F1 Nation on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all major podcast apps, or F1's YouTube channel. Check out In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix. Dedicated to Formula 1 and MotoGP, In the Fast Lane host Matt Clayton is joined by F1 journalist Michael Laminato and MotoGP race winner Chris Vermeulen to interview some of the biggest names in world motorsport and update you on all the latest F1 and MotoGP racing news and talking points. You can find In the Fast Lane each week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix, live from Albert Park, with Matt Clayton and Michael Laminato. All right, we're going to give away some sunglass vouchers. Before we continue on with the podcast, this has just grown a life of its own. There have been a few folks have been hanging around too. Thank you for sticking around, everyone. What?
I just enjoy listening to you, that's all. You make me happy, Pete.
Madam, you get one. Well done. You, madam, the pink cap, get one as well. Where's our fellow with the white cap? Where did he go? Oh, there he is. You've swapped it. His hat's on the right way. Magnificent. There you go. Thanks to our friends at Maui Gym. Give them a round of applause. Our mates here at Maui Gym, they're fantastic. Go and see them right near Gate 1. The boys are wearing their sunglasses.
Yes.
Let's continue on with this podcast, shall we? Matt, back to you.
Thank you so much, Peter Mercato, man of the people. The great man of the people. Man of the people, Peter Mercato. We are joined here on In the Fast Lane, the official podcast of the Australian Grand Prix, by Autosport journalist Luke Smith. Luke, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Really good to be here. And yeah, lovely to see so many fans over the weekend. It's been amazing.
Well, just this crowd figure, we were just talking about it off air before. I think if it breaks 101,000, it'll be the biggest Australian Grand Prix in 25 runnings of this event at the Albert Park Grand Prix circuit, and a chance to be the biggest 4-day crowd of any Australian sporting event ever. So this is, it's the perfect storm of no race for 3 years, bit of Drive to Survive, bit of Max versus Lewis and Abu Dhabi. Let's not talk about Abu Dhabi. And
Please don't mention that.
No, Michael, no.
No, Michael.
And an Australian driving for a papaya-coloured team in McLaren for the first time in Daniel Ricciardo. But Luke, let's look ahead at this afternoon's race. 58 laps of a brand new modified Australian Grand Prix circuit. Charles Leclerc pretty dominant in qualifying when you look at the margin. Do you feel this is a Ferrari race to lose, or are we looking at instalment number 3 of Charles Leclerc versus Max Verstappen for 2022?
Yeah, I think we are probably looking at round 3 of that fight between the two of them. It's been so close between them so far this season. And if you look at the long run pace from Friday, they're very, very evenly matched, maybe even Verstappen a little bit ahead. So I think that is really promising. I think for the race, it could be really, really close between them. The layout, I think that it's done what it was meant to do. It does afford itself to more side-by-side battles, more action. So I think if, the first year race set anything to go by, it's going to be pretty spicy between the two of them once again.
Cool.
Let's go for the crowd-pleasing angle, because McLaren seems like they're doing weirdly well, and there are generally a lot of McLaren fans here. Yes, there are. Look at them all. I've all got, the last time Daniel Ricciardo here was in Renault, I feel like a lot of people spent a lot in merchandise in the last 2 years just to change their colours, haven't they?
I did see someone yesterday wearing a Renault t-shirt and a McLaren cap, and I was like, I understand why that is.
And Red Bull shoes probably, and Toro Rosso pants, and you'll be sorted.
Yeah.
Absolutely a museum of a person walking around.
No HRT memorabilia?
Maybe the underwear. Maybe it's fireproof too as well after the weekend.
Do they have memorabilia?
Probably worth quite a bit of money, I reckon. I'd buy it. They look relatively good here. Much better than we could possibly have expected based on the first 2 rounds. I've been interested to hear the way they've responded to that, though, because there's a mixture of optimism but also pessimism that it's just the track. What do you think the gains are all about, and how well should we expect them to do in the race?
I think you can be pretty optimistic if you're a Daniel Ricciardo fan. I think that They are definitely responding better to the circuit here, and both drivers made no secret that Lando Norris said it's even 80% down to the track, basically, why they are so quick. But Andreas Seidel, he was a bit more sort of upbeat about things. He said, well, no, it's also that we brought some upgrades to the car that have worked. We've also sort of made up for lost time in testing, so they understand the car more as well. So I think it's pretty promising, and I think that, yeah, they're definitely in that sort of lead midfield fight, which again weirdly has Mercedes in it, which is never a sentence you would have said sort of over the past few years. But it's I think there's a good chance of a good result for Danny Rick today.
You mentioned Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton 5th on the grid, George Russell 6th. Now this is a team that's been on pole in Melbourne for 6 straight years before yesterday, and 5th and 6th seems wildly optimistic. They may be maybe the 5th fastest team right now if you're factoring Alpine ahead of them. We know they've got this massive issue with porpoising. It's not like it's the only car that's porpoising. Ferrari's got their porpoising. It's just when they get to the corner, it seems to be fine. Lewis Hamilton sounds like he's as unhappy driving anything in his entire career as what he's driving right now. They know what the problem is, but solving this while you've got a live championship just logistically bouncing around the world like it is, it's going to take a while, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And obviously with the cost cap as well this year, that's another such a big impact as well. So I think that's going to be a real challenge for them. And yeah, Lewis has never really been that downbeat about things. Like, even if they're on the back foot, normally it's, look, we're a team and we're going to learn and we're going to pull through. And we've had a bit of that. But yeah, yesterday in the media pen, he was pretty frank about things. Said, look, I'm not overly optimistic even about sort of what they're going to do. So I think there's a lot of work for them to do moving forward. 5th and 6th, that's probably generous given where they actually are. As you said, maybe the 5th fastest team. Definitely coming down back to earth after sort of such a long period of dominance. Now struggling in the midfield.
How's your Spanish? Is it good?
So-so.
You want to talk El Plan?
I think what's so-so in Spanish, but I don't even know that, to be honest with you. So.
Let's talk El Plan, because it was going really pretty much to plan until Q3, I think, for Fernando Alonso. But I love Fernando Alonso because he's never shy of telling you how great he is he? Like, he loves to remind you that he's tops. And he is tops, but he loves to tell you. Yesterday, he reckons he could have got pole. I think that's probably slightly ambitious, but he would have been close. He would have been, yeah. The times were good. To be fair to him. Alpine, another team that's doing really well. Do we think now that they were sort of optimistic in pre-season, didn't really show it, but there's a clear trajectory in the first 3 rounds. Do we feel like they're just warming up to being something much greater than perhaps we thought only a month or so ago?
I don't know if they're going to be maybe in that front fight, but I think that they're definitely, probably in the upper midfield fight with McLaren, Mercedes. That's probably where they're about right now. And it does seem they've made a big step forward since testing. I think particularly the first test, they were pretty average. I didn't think they were going to be anything special. So to now be putting in laps like that and saying I could have been on pole, even with the sort of Fernando Alonso exaggeration tax on that, I think it's positive for them. So I think it's looking good for Alonso. I think that he said in the race, like, I want to sort of try and fight my way up the order. Obviously the team are doing the repairs to that car. I assume it's all going to be okay. There's been nothing said so far about any big changes, but it's El Plan is going to plan, I think, even with the El Pain of yesterday.
El Pain, I like it. Add a vowel. I suspect that Otmar Safnauer might not be eating a hell of a lot for lunch right now because he's got his 2 drivers lining up line astern, P8, P10 on the grid. And if it turns into what happened in Jeddah in the opening laps, then it could be pretty interesting for him. But I do like the Fernando Alonso exaggeration tax. It's the 2022 version of the Kimi Raikkonen superannuation tour for me. I might have to roll that one out from time to time. But I think, look, the circuit has promised more overtaking. That's why these changes were put in place. We're going to get a real-life example of whether that's possible on this circuit because of the driver who's most out of place on this grid today is Carlos Sainz, who's going to split those 2 Alpines on the grid in P9. We've seen that it's a Ferrari, Red Bull world and everyone else is, taking positions behind them at the moment. It's the first time we've really seen one of them out of place, though, on the grid. And he was very unlucky with qualifying yesterday with red flags and what have you. But I think the referendum on whether this circuit allows passing, I think Carlos Sainz might be the answer to that this afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even for F1's new regulations this year as well, I think this is going to be such a good test for it to see have the changes actually work, made sort of the difference that we wanted and to make that positive step forward. But I think that, if he can fight his way up the order, that's going to be really interesting. I think obviously we're down to 3 DRS zones now. How does that factor in? Does that sort of remove some of the opportunities. I don't know. But yeah, the sort of reaction from drivers has been quite mixed. Some of them have been like, nah, I'm not really sure it's going to make much of a difference. But I think there's reason to be optimistic. I'm pretty positive, and yeah, see science charging through. Maybe even Alonso as well. If he could have been on pole, maybe he can go with him and have two Spaniards up there. We'll see.
That'd be something.
I want to fast forward a little bit to the back of the grid. We just had Jess Hawkins on from Aston Martin. I feel like they could have used some stunt driving on track yesterday, at least early on. They've had a really awful weekend. The team's had a really dreadful weekend. Sebastian Vettel is his first weekend. I love that about Sebastian Vettel because this should be the first race of the season. It is for him, even though it's been pretty...
Traditions.
It's traditions, exactly right. The car we know is not really there for them at the moment. There's potential to improve because they've got this porpoising problem that they feel like they can unlock and move forward. But this is, one of the more difficult weekends for them. How do you see this phase of the season playing out? Because it is difficult to keep morale high when expectations were high. How do you see that working out for them?
I think, like a lot of teams, they just got to really dig deep now and stick together. And I mean, even something like yesterday, getting Seb's car out for qualifying, that's a really sort of nice thing to bring everyone together and say, look, we're a team, we're united, this is what we can do. But yeah, they've got a long way to go. I mean, so Sebastian, he always gives his car a name at the beginning of the season. And that's like a real, again, tradition that he has. And I said to him, obviously, the first time we've seen him since the year started, and we said, look, what is the name of the car? And he was like, no, I'm not naming it yet. I want to get more pace, then I'll name it. And it's even something like that. It's so simple, but you're thinking it's little things that, they're not doing, and they're just still trying to figure things out. So, a long way for them to go, because I think particularly after last year, there was quite bruising anyway in their first year as Aston Martin. They really need to find some pace, because otherwise it's going to be a really tough year for both the drivers.
It's hard to name your car when you're sweeping it into a dustbin several times a weekend. It makes life a little bit difficult. But look, let's look a little bit further down the grid, because we're having to look down the starting grid for the further than we have for a long while for a driver named Valtteri Bottas, of course, the most recent winner of an Australian Grand Prix in 2019. First time in 104 races that he hasn't made Q3. He starts 12th today. Zhou Guanyu, his teammate, starting 14th. Alpha's been a bit of a pleasant surprise this season so far. I mean, they've almost outscored their 2021 points tally after the first couple of races. They're the only team that changed both drivers over the off-season, and we know that every team's had a big job list with these new cars and what have you. Have they exceeded your expectations, or did you see yesterday as perhaps, okay, maybe they're settling down into where they might be as we go forward? I
think it's going to be track by track, track specific. I think that, and we saw with the Haas drivers as well, they said, look, it's not really suiting them so much. And I think that the Ferrari power unit, it's not as great here maybe as it would have been at the previous two circuits. So I think that there's reason for optimism. I think that, this could be more of a blip more than anything. We've seen, McLaren take a big step forward. And I think that the development race through this year is going to be so rapid that any little update is really important. So it'll fluctuate back and forth. But I think, they have been, as you say, a pleasant surprise this year. It's been really good to see Bottas, I think, very, very happy, out of Lewis Hamilton's shadow a little bit and performing really well. Like, again, he's been brilliant so far this season. I don't think he could have done a lot more yesterday. So I think Alpha can be really pleased with how they've started this year. And it seems to be going pretty well for them.
Before we turn our attention to what we might be able to expect this afternoon, the track changes here, hopefully they're going to deliver. We'll only know for sure this afternoon. But this is a year as well where we've changed the cars to try and improve the spectacle a little bit. There's a generally more formulaic or considered approach to these kind of matters by F1. Do you think these kind of track modifications are something we should see at more circuits where we also tend to see a little bit of a struggle of a spectacle?
Yeah, definitely. I think in previous years, the track was the track and that was kind of it. And then you would say, okay, well, what can we do to the cars? And F1 have now taken a more holistic view and said, well, look, what can we do to the tracks as well? And we saw that in Abu Dhabi last year. It's a great effect. I thought that was really, really good. Same again here. And I think they are looking now at the whole package. It is, okay, what can we do with both the cars and the tracks instead of just one or the other? So, I think it's a positive sign. Again, if this works, it'll be another sort of, example of why you should do these changes. But I think it's really cool. I went for a track run on Friday night and it was just really cool seeing the track. It feels more like a street circuit now, I think. It's, really, really cool.
Yeah.
If these cars produce a good race for the Spanish Grand Prix, Michael, then the rules have worked, because that does not happen very often, as we know. We've come to the part of the podcast where we dust off the crystal ball, the virtual one anyway. We can't afford one on this podcast. But let's look ahead to this afternoon. 58 laps of this circuit, 3 p.m. race start. We know the grid. Luke, I'm going to ask you second and put Michael on the spot first. I'll give you time to think.
Thank you.
Michael, who's on your podium and where does Daniel Ricciardo finish?
I was actually asked this earlier on today.
So you're
this week
prepared?
we're doing. Yeah, I was prepared, but I sort of did a really ambitious pick for that because I didn't think anyone would ever read them. I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc because it just did feel like it felt like he found a little bit of something extra in qualifying, and Max just sounded very pessimistic after yesterday's race, although he was a little bit more optimistic about his race pace. So I'm going to say Leclerc and Verstappen, and I reckon there's going to be McLaren on the podium because they're ahead of the Mercedes, and while I like the prospect of overtaking on this track, I think it will work. Two Mercedes cars, I still think I'm going to be a bit of a cork in the bottle here. But just because I'm very patriotic, I'm going to say it's going to be Daniel Ricciardo's car in third rather than Lando Norris. I don't know how. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm going to just say that. Because probably no one else will pick that either.
I like your optimism. Luke, what have you got?
I was thinking a McLaren podium as well, actually. But I guess if I've got to be patriotic, I've got to say Lando Norris then, surely, for the Brits.
And then the tomatoes will be thrown at you from the local crowd.
McLaren are looking good, so why not? I think that, I don't know, maybe something happens between those two lead guys. I don't know. I'm gonna say a Max Verstappen wins, so we're sort of going opposite. And maybe a Sergio Perez second place, a Rebel 1-2 with sort of a step back against Ferrari. I don't know, but it's So let's go Verstappen, Perez, Norris as my podium, and Danny reckon fifth. I'll say.
Okay.
I think he would sign up for fifth, quite frankly, at the moment, the way things have gone.
Yeah.
But look. Albert Park's first corner is notorious for incident and accident. We've seen that over the years. It's the 20-year anniversary this year of Ralph Schumacher sending himself into the next suburb over the back of Rubens Barrichello 20 years ago, unbelievably today. But I like your idea of Sergio Perez in second, but that obviously means that Max Verstappen is not in the race because I can't see a situation where Sergio Perez is going to be allowed to finish ahead of Max Verstappen. Sergio, you need to box late for tyres. There could be something like that going on.
Fastest lap.
Could be fastest lap point. It could be that. But I don't mind the idea of a McLaren on the podium, but I suspect it might be Lando Norris if it is a McLaren on the podium. But I'm suspecting Charles Leclerc may win this. But look, certainly so much to look forward to. Massive crowd here today. Luke, it's been great to catch up with you and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. And I hope everyone enjoys the weekend.
So that's where we're going to wrap up in the Fast Lane live at the Australian Grand Prix on Sunday. Remember, you can find In the Fast Lane every week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us via the Australian Grand Prix and Australian Motorcycle Grand Prix on social media. Enjoy race day at the 2022 Formula One Heineken Australian Grand Prix. For Michael Laminato, I'm Matt Clayton. Thank you for listening and join us next time for another lap in the Fast Lane.